You've entered void of rules, a realm where normal constraints cease to exist. But beware, traveller, there is one rule here. You've got to hit subscribe. Seriously, it's the only rule we have. We just reached 1,000 brave souls, and we're hunting for 9,000 more to complete our dark ritual. I mean, reach our next goal, so subscribe. Or don't. But remember, the void remembers those who defy the only rule. Now let's get into today's video. The Hassayampa Inn rose from downtown Prescott like a Spanish colonial monument to Arizona's golden age. Built in 1927, its red tile roof and cream-coloured stucco walls had weathered nearly a century of desert storms and tourists seeking authentic southwestern charm. The building stretched 4 stories high, with thick adobe walls that kept the interior cool during blazing summer days and warm during the high desert's surprisingly cold winter nights. Arched doorways and hand-painted tiles throughout the lobby spoke to the craftsmanship of an era when hotels were built to last generations, not decades. If you looked closely at the Hassayampa, you'd notice things that didn't quite align with typical hospitality design. The windows on the 5th floor were bricked over from the inside, visible only as dark rectangles against the cream stucco. The ballroom's original entrance had been sealed with ornate metalwork that looked decorative, but was actually functional, keeping something in or perhaps keeping something out. And the grandfather clock in the lobby had been modified over the decades, its mechanism housing components that had nothing to do with timekeeping. What most guests never learned was that some hotels accumulate more than just history in their walls. The Hassayampa had seen cattle barons and copper kings, movie stars fleeing Hollywood scandals, and politicians conducting business they preferred to keep away from Phoenix. But it had also witnessed events that never made it into the official records, occurrences that the management had learned to handle through careful procedures developed over decades of trial and terrible error. I'm Ezra Caldwell, and 3 weeks ago I thought I'd found the perfect escape from my burned-out tech career. After 6 years of corporate training seminars, stakeholder meetings, and endless video conferences about synergistic solutions and paradigm shifts, the idea of managing a historic hotel's night shift seemed wonderfully simple. No more PowerPoint presentations about leveraging cross-platform optimization. No more explaining to executives why their brilliant ideas violated basic principles of physics and human psychology. Just quiet halls, the occasional late check-in, and plenty of time to read between security rounds. Or so I thought. I'd spent the previous decade climbing the corporate ladder in San Francisco's tech industry, training teams on software implementations and change management protocols. The work paid well, but it had slowly drained something essential from my soul. Every day felt identical. The same conference rooms with their whiteboards covered in meaningless diagrams. The same buzzwords delivered with evangelical fervour. The same people pretending that moving digital boxes around on screens was changing the world in meaningful ways. The breaking point came during a particularly absurd meeting where I spent 2 hours explaining why we couldn't simply disrupt the algorithm to make our project management software predict the future. When the VP of Innovation asked me to think outside the box about thinking outside the box, I realized I needed to escape before the corporate speak permanently damaged my ability to communicate in plain English. The final straw was a performance review, where my supervisor criticized me for being insufficiently agile in my approach to ideation optimization. I'd apparently failed to demonstrate adequate enthusiasm for a project that involved teaching artificial intelligence to feel emotions. When I pointed out that the project violated both computer science principles and basic logic, I was told I needed to work on my solution-focused mindset. That night, I updated my resume and started searching for jobs that involved real problems with practical solutions. Arizona called to me because it represented everything Silicon Valley wasn't: open spaces, genuine history, and people who solve problems with common sense rather than theoretical frameworks. When I saw the job posting for assistant night manager at a historic Prescott hotel, it felt like fate intervening on my behalf. The posting had been surprisingly straightforward, seeking detail-oriented professional for overnight hospitality management position. Must be capable of following established procedures precisely. Previous experience in protocol compliance preferred. Excellent compensation for the right candidate. After years of decoding corporate job descriptions that bore no resemblance to actual work requirements, the directness was refreshing. My first day orientation with Dolores Martinez, the day manager, went smoothly enough. She'd been running hotel operations for 15 years, having started as a front desk clerk fresh out of college and worked her way up through every department. Her efficiency was impressive. She could check in a guest, handle a maintenance request, and resolve a billing dispute simultaneously while maintaining the kind of professional warmth that earned 5-star reviews. But what struck me most about Dolores was her precision. Every procedure had been refined to eliminate wasted motion or ambiguous steps. The reservation system integration was flawless. The guest services protocols anticipated every possible request or complaint. Even the coffee machine had been programmed to deliver exactly the right temperature and strength for optimal customer satisfaction. Dolores showed me the reservation system, surprisingly modern interface that had been integrated seamlessly with the hotel's vintage aesthetic. She explained the guest services protocols, walked me through the night audit procedures, and introduced me to the small crew of housekeeping and maintenance staff who worked the evening shift. Everything felt reassuringly normal and professional. The Hassayampa operated with 96 guest rooms spread across 4 floors, plus several meeting spaces, a restaurant that served breakfast and lunch, and the famous ballroom that had hosted everything from territorial governors' inaugural balls to Hollywood rap parties during the 1940s. The lobby featured hand-carved wooden furniture from the original construction, Persian rugs that had been carefully maintained for decades, and a grandfather clock that had been keeping time since 1928. The clock's a bit temperamental, Dolores mentioned, as we passed it during the tour. Sometimes it runs fast, sometimes slow. Guests find it charming, so we've never had it repaired. Just pay attention when it chimes, count carefully. The way she said count carefully carried an odd emphasis, as if the instruction meant more than simple timekeeping awareness. But before I could ask for clarification, she'd moved on to explaining the elevator system. We have 2 passenger elevators and 1 service elevator, she said. The passenger elevators are reliable, but occasionally the older one will stop on the 5th floor without being called. When that happens, just press the lobby button and it'll correct itself. Don't get off on 5. There's nothing up there but storage and maintenance access. Again, her tone suggested the instruction was more important than routine operational guidance, but her expression remained professionally neutral. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the lobby's arched windows, Dolores seemed to grow more nervous. She kept checking her watch and glancing toward the grandfather clock that dominated the far corner of the reception area. Her usual confident demeanor gave way to something that looked almost like anxiety, though she tried to mask it with increased bustle around the front desk. "Ezra," she finally said around 4:30, her voice taking on an unusual formality that contrasted sharply with the casual friendliness she'd shown throughout the day. "There are some additional protocols for the night shift, specific procedures that aren't part of the standard hotel manual or the corporate training materials." She reached into her desk drawer and withdrew a manila envelope marked "Night Operations, Critical Protocols," in block letters that looked like they'd been printed on an old typewriter. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, as if it contained more than simple paperwork. The manila was slightly yellowed around the edges, suggesting the envelope had been in use for quite some time. "These rules exist for very important reasons," Dolores continued. her fingers drumming nervously against the mahogany desk surface. The previous night manager, Thomas Brennan, had to leave suddenly under unfortunate circumstances. He'd been with us for 8 months and seemed to be doing well, but there was an incident during his final shift that required immediate intervention from management. I took the envelope, noting how Dolores avoided meeting my eyes. The weight of it felt disproportionate to what should have been a few pages of additional instructions. What kind of circumstances? Was there some sort of emergency? Dolores was quiet for a long moment, staring at the envelope in my hands. Thomas was a good manager, thorough, professional, excellent with guests, but he had a tendency to improvise when he encountered situations that weren't covered in the standard procedures. He thought he could handle unusual circumstances with creative problem solving. Her voice carried a sadness that seemed disproportionate to discussing a former employee's departure. The thing about this hotel, Ezra, is that creative problem solving can be dangerous. Sometimes the best solution is to follow the established protocol exactly, even when it seems illogical or unnecessary. Just follow the rules, Ezra, every single one, every single night, without exception or modification. Her emphasis on those final words carried a weight that seemed to press down on the entire conversation. The hotel has been operating successfully for nearly a century because people follow the procedures that keep it running smoothly. These aren't suggestions or guidelines. They're absolute requirements for anyone working the night shift. The way she emphasized successfully made it sound like she was discussing something far more serious than guest satisfaction, ratings, or operational efficiency. There was an undertone in her voice that suggested the hotel's continued existence depended on strict adherence to whatever protocols were contained in that envelope. I've been day manager here for 15 years, Dolores continued, and I've seen what happens when people think they know better than the procedures. The rules aren't arbitrary, and they're not hazing rituals for new employees. They're based on decades of experience dealing with situations that don't occur during normal business hours. She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. The Hassayampa Inn has some unique characteristics that become more pronounced after dark. These procedures have been developed to ensure that both staff and guests have safe, comfortable experiences, regardless of what else might be happening in the building. What else might be happening? I asked. Dolores looked directly at me for the first time since producing the envelope. Just follow the rules, Ezra. All of them, exactly as written. Your survival depends on it. The word survival hit me like cold water. This wasn't about job performance or customer service excellence. Whatever was in that envelope, Dolores believed my physical safety hung in the balance. After Dolores left, I settled into the night manager's office, a cozy space behind the front desk, furnished with the same attention to historic detail as the rest of the hotel. The desk was solid oak, probably original to the building, and the filing cabinets had been restored to match the vintage aesthetic while incorporating modern security features. A bank of monitors showed feeds from security cameras positioned throughout the property, and a radio system allowed communication with housekeeping and maintenance staff. I opened the envelope with the curiosity of someone who'd spent years analysing corporate procedures and identifying inefficiencies in operational workflows. Inside, I found a single sheet of hotel letterhead containing 10 numbered rules. The typing looked professional, executed on what appeared to be a high-quality typewriter, but each rule had handwritten additions and corrections in different coloured inks, as if the list had been refined over time through practical experience. The handwriting styles varied significantly. Some additions were in neat cursive that suggested an older generation of managers, while others appeared in block printing that looked more contemporary. A few corrections had been made with different types of pens, ballpoint, felt tip, even what appeared to be fountain pen ink, suggesting that updates had been made across several decades. Rule 1, never enter, room 426 between 11:30 p.m. and 5 a.m. Redirect all emergency calls to the front desk phone, handwritten edition, in blue ink. Maintenance requests can be scheduled for the following business day. Do not make exceptions for any reason. Previous violations resulted in permanent staff loss. Rule 2. If the elevator doors open on the 5th floor without being summoned, remain inside and press L for lobby 5 consecutive times. Handwritten edition in black ink. Do not exit elevator under any circumstances. Count presses allowed to ensure accuracy. The 5th floor is not accessible to staff. Rule 3. Count every chime when the grandfather clock strikes midnight. If it chimes more than 12, announce each number aloud. Handwritten edition in red ink. Volume of announcement is not important. Accuracy of count is critical. Do not investigate clock mechanism. Rule 4. Any guest requesting towels, soap, or amenities after 1 a.m. must be served without direct eye contact. Handwritten edition in green ink. Focus on guest's shoulder or clothing. Peripheral vision is acceptable. Direct eye contact can cause severe complications for staff. Rule 5. Piano music from the sealed ballroom indicates everything is functioning normally. Verify all exits are locked, but do not investigate handwritten edition in purple ink. Music may be accompanied by other sounds, including voices and laughter. This is expected. Do not attempt to gain entry under any circumstances. Rule 6. The basement storage light must remain on at all times. If you find it off, replace the bulb immediately and report to morning management. Handwritten edition in brown ink. Check basement hourly. If multiple bulbs fail in one night, replace all and remain in basement until lighting stabilizes. Do not investigate the source of bulb failures. Rule 7. Phone calls consisting of exactly 6 rings followed by silence should never be answered, even if they repeat. Handwritten edition in orange ink. Pattern may repeat up to 7 times. Do not answer, regardless of caller ID display. Do not attempt to trace the source of these calls. Rule 8. Check the guest registry hourly. Any names written in red ink must be crossed out with black pen. Within 60 seconds, handwritten edition in grey ink. Use only black ink for corrections. Other colours are ineffective. Time limit is strict. Red ink entries indicate unauthorised registrations. Rule 9. Between 2:45 and 3:15 a.m, avoid the main staircase entirely. Use only the service stairs during this window. Handwritten edition in navy ink. Sounds from main staircase during this period are normal. Do not investigate or attempt to assist anyone you may hear. Rule 10. If you detect the scent of desert sage in any indoor area, evacuate that space immediately and do not return until after sunrise. Handwritten edition in burgundy ink. Any trace of sage scent triggers evacuation protocol. Do not attempt to identify source or determine concentration levels. Previous interpretation errors have proven fatal. At the bottom of the page, a typed note read, "Compliance with these protocols ensures operational continuity and staff well-being. Non-compliance has historically resulted in immediate termination and additional consequences. HI management." The phrase "additional consequences" had been underlined 3 times in what appeared to be the same burgundy ink used for the Rule 10 edition. In the margin next to it, someone had written in pencil, "Thomas ignored Rule 10, never found his body." I stared at that penciled note for a full minute, my hands beginning to shake slightly. Thomas Brennan, the previous night manager Dolores had mentioned, the one who'd left under unfortunate circumstances. According to this margin note, he hadn't left at all. He'd disappeared. I checked the handwriting on all the rule editions, comparing them to each other and to the penciled note. Different hands, different pens, different decades of refinement. Each addition seemed to represent a lesson learned through someone's terrible experience. How many night managers had there been? How many had contributed their hard-won knowledge to this list before vanishing themselves? My corporate training background kicked in automatically, but instead of analysing the procedures for efficiency, I found myself studying them for survival value. These weren't guidelines for customer service excellence. They were a manual for staying alive in a building that operated according to rules that had nothing to do with normal hospitality management. The specific timing windows suggested that whatever happened at the Hassayampa Inn followed predictable patterns. The prohibition against entering room 426 during specific hours implied that the room was safe during the day but dangerous at night. The elevator stopping on the 5th floor without being called suggested some kind of automated system. But automated by what? The requirement to count clock chimes aloud felt like a test or verification procedure, as if something was monitoring whether the night manager was paying proper attention. The restriction against making eye contact with late-night guests suggested that these weren't normal people making normal requests. I realized I was approaching this like a software debugging problem, trying to understand the underlying logic of a system that might not operate according to any logic I could comprehend. But Dolores had been clear. Understanding wasn't required. Compliance was. I folded the rules and tucked them into my shirt pocket, feeling the slight weight of the paper against my chest. The smart thing would be to walk away. To find another job at a normal hotel, where the biggest challenges involved overbooked rooms and difficult guests. But I'd already invested weeks in this position, and the pay was significantly better than anything else I'd found in Arizona. More than that, I was curious. My analytical mind wanted to understand what was really happening at the Hassayampa Inn. Were these rules elaborate security protocols designed to protect guests from some kind of criminal activity? Safety procedures related to the building's age and structural quirks? Or was there something genuinely supernatural occurring that required these specific countermeasures? Whatever the truth, I decided to treat my first night as a field test. I'd follow the rules exactly as written and observe the results. If nothing unusual happened, I'd know the procedures were precautionary. If strange things did occur, I'd have the protocols to handle them safely. The first few hours of my shift passed with reassuring normalcy that made me wonder if the dramatic warnings had been overblown. I checked in 2 late arriving guests, a business traveller from Phoenix and an elderly couple celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary with a romantic getaway. Both interactions followed standard hospitality protocols, with guests appreciating the hotel's historic charm and the personalised service that larger chain hotels couldn't provide. The business traveller, a software consultant named David Park, seemed particularly interested in the hotel's history. "This place has so much character," he said as I handed him his keycards. "You can feel the history in the walls. I bet you get some interesting stories working the night shift." "Every old building has its quirks," I replied diplomatically. "But the Hassayampa has been taking excellent care of guests for nearly a century." "Any ghost stories?" he asked with the enthusiasm of someone who enjoyed supernatural tales but didn't actually believe in them. "Nothing that interferes with a good night's sleep," I said, though I found myself thinking about the rules folded in my pocket. I handled a minor noise complaint from a guest on the 2nd floor who could hear their upstairs neighbours watching television at excessive volume. A polite phone call to the offending room resolved the issue quickly, with the guests apologising and immediately lowering their volume. I completed the evening security rounds, checking doors, windows and fire exits throughout the property, finding everything secure and properly maintained. Room 426 was located at the end of the 4th floor corridor, in what had originally been designed as one of the hotel's premium suites. According to the information Dolores had given me, the room was currently occupied by a guest who checked in that afternoon for a 3-night stay. The guest registry showed Robert Chen in standard blue ink, with a San Diego address, and a note indicating he'd requested extra towels during check-in. The door looked perfectly ordinary, heavy wood with brass fittings that matched the rest of the hotel's vintage aesthetic. There was nothing to suggest why this particular room required special protocols, but as I stood in the hallway checking my watch, 10:45 p.m, still 45 minutes before the restriction began, I noticed that the air near room 426 felt noticeably cooler than the rest of the corridor. I made a note to mention the temperature variation to maintenance. Old buildings often had heating distribution issues, and guest comfort was a priority, regardless of any supernatural concerns. The Hassayampa felt like any other historic hotel after dark. Creaky wooden floors that spoke to nearly a century of guests walking these same corridors, the distant hum of old heating systems that had been upgraded for efficiency while maintaining their original character, and the particular silence that comes with thick adobe walls that insulated the interior from the sounds of downtown Prescott's modest nightlife. But as the evening progressed, I began to notice details that seemed slightly off. The silence wasn't quite complete. There were faint sounds that didn't correspond to any obvious source. Footsteps in unoccupied areas. Doors closing when all guests were accounted for. The soft murmur of conversation from empty meeting rooms. At first, I attributed these sounds to the building's age and the acoustic quirks that came with thick walls and vintage construction, but the sounds were too regular, too purposeful to be random settling or thermal expansion. It was as if the hotel was occupied by people I couldn't see, going about their daily routines in parallel with the visible guests. At 11:40 p.m, the front desk phone rang with the urgent insistence that suggested an unhappy guest with a legitimate complaint. The caller ID showed an internal extension. Room 426. Front desk, this is Ezra. How can I help you? Thank God someone answered. The voice belonged to an elderly man, stressed and breathless, with the slightly formal diction of someone who'd grown up in an era when telephone conversations followed more rigid etiquette. There's something wrong with the plumbing in here. Water's backing up from the bathroom drain, and it smells terrible. I think there might be a sewage problem, or maybe a dead animal in the pipes. I glanced at my watch, 11:42 p.m. Rule 1 specifically prohibited entering room 426 between 11:30 p.m. and 5 a.m, with a handwritten addition emphasizing that maintenance requests could be scheduled for the following business day without exceptions. The margin note about Thomas Brennan's disappearance flashed through my mind. I'm very sorry about the inconvenience, Mr. Chen. Our maintenance team will address the plumbing issue first thing in the morning with a full diagnostic of the drainage system. In the meantime, I'd be happy to move you to a comparable room on a different floor. Would that work for you? Move rooms? I'm already settled in for the night. And I have an early morning meeting. Can't someone just come take a look? It might be a simple fix, maybe just the clog that needs to be cleared. The man's frustration was clearly genuine, and my customer service instincts wanted to find an immediate solution to his problem. In my previous corporate role, I'd always prided myself on going above and beyond standard procedures to ensure client satisfaction. But Rule 1 was unambiguous, and the handwritten warning about permanent staff loss suggested that exceptions could be literally fatal. I understand your frustration, and I apologize that you're experiencing this problem during your stay. However, our maintenance protocols require us to handle plumbing issues during regular hours to ensure we have the proper equipment and expertise available for a thorough resolution. I can offer you our executive suite on the 3rd floor at no additional charge, and we'll have your belongings transferred within 15 minutes. There was a long pause on the phone, and I could hear what sounded like water gurgling in the background. Then Mr. Chen's voice changed, becoming oddly flat and emotionless. Are you sure you can't make an exception? I really think someone should come up here, right now. The tone sent chills down my spine. It was the same voice, but empty of the human warmth and frustration that had characterized his earlier words. He sounded like someone reading from a script, or like something trying to mimic human speech patterns without understanding the emotions behind them. "I'll have housekeeping assist with your room transfer immediately," I said, ending the call quickly. As I arranged for the room change, I realised I'd just encountered my first genuine test of the rules. The guest's request had seemed completely reasonable, until that final moment when his voice had changed. Something was in room 426 that could mimic human speech well enough to fool me initially, but not perfectly enough to maintain the illusion under pressure. At exactly midnight, the grandfather clock began to chime with the deep, resonant tones that had been marking time in the lobby for nearly a century. The sound carried throughout the hotel, a familiar comfort to guests who appreciated the authentic atmosphere of a truly historic property. I found myself counting automatically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The clock continued chiming. 13, 14. 14 chimes. According to Rule 3, I needed to announce each number aloud when the clock chimed more than 12 times. The handwritten edition had emphasized that volume wasn't important, but accuracy was critical. 14, I said to the empty lobby, feeling slightly foolish but remembering Dolores's warning about survival depending on compliance. As the sound of the final chime faded, I heard footsteps approaching from the direction of the main staircase. A guest appeared, the same business traveller I'd checked in earlier, David Park. But something was wrong with the way he moved. His steps were too regular, too precisely timed, as if he was marching to a beat only he could hear. "Excuse me," he said, stopping directly in front of the front desk. "I couldn't help but notice that your clock chimed 14 times. That's quite unusual for a timepiece, isn't it?" His smile was perfectly pleasant, but his eyes were wrong. They reflected the lobby lights like mirrors, showing no depth or life behind them. And when he spoke, I noticed that his lips didn't quite synchronize with the words I was hearing. "Old clocks can be temperamental," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sometimes they need a few extra chimes to keep accurate time." "Accurate time," he repeated, as if testing the phrase. "Yes, accuracy is very important. Don't you think it's important to be accurate about everything, Ezra?" I hadn't told him my name. It wasn't on a name tag, and he'd checked in hours before my shift began. More unsettling was the way he emphasized the word everything, as if he knew about the rules and was testing whether I'd follow them correctly. "I try to be as helpful as possible to all our guests," I said carefully. David Park nodded slowly, his mirror-like eyes never leaving my face. "I'm sure you do. I'm sure you follow all the proper procedures." Then he turned and walked back toward the elevator, his steps maintaining that same unnaturally regular rhythm. I watched him until the elevator doors closed, then immediately checked the guest registry. David Park's name was still there in blue ink, exactly as it had been when he checked in. But now there was something else, a faint notation in the margin next to his name, written in ink so pale it was barely visible. "Monitoring compliance." My hands were shaking as I made my first hourly registry check at 1 a.m. All guest names appeared in standard blue or black ink, exactly as they should according to the hotel's standard documentation procedures. But I found myself studying each entry carefully, looking for any signs of the supernatural monitoring that seemed to be taking place. At 1:20 a.m., another guest approached the front desk with the fluid movements of someone extremely tall and naturally graceful. She stood perhaps 6.5 feet in height, with perfectly straight posture and movements that seemed to flow rather than step. Her clothing was elegant but somehow timeless, the kind of classic style that could have been fashionable in any decade from the 1940s onward. But it was her face that made my breath catch. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost mathematically perfect, as if someone had taken the most attractive features from a dozen different people and combined them with inhuman precision. Her skin had a porcelain quality that reflected light without seeming to absorb any of it. "Excuse me," she said in a voice that carried oddly in the lobby space, seeming to come from multiple directions simultaneously. "I need fresh towels for my room. The ones provided were insufficient for my needs." Rule 4 immediately came to mind. Serve late-night amenity requests without direct eye contact. The handwritten edition had specified focusing on the guest's shoulder or clothing, with a warning that direct eye contact could cause severe complications for staff. I focused on her shoulder as I spoke, noting that her clothing seemed to shimmer slightly in the lobby's ambient lighting. "Of course, I'll get those for you right away. What's your room number?" 318. As I retrieved towels from the housekeeping closet, I found myself desperate to look directly at her face. There was something compelling about her presence, an almost magnetic pull that made it physically difficult to maintain my focus on her shoulder. Every instinct screamed at me to make proper eye contact, to provide the kind of attentive service that guests expected from a luxury hotel, but the handwritten warning about severe complications kept me disciplined. I handed her the towels while maintaining my peripheral focus, noticing in my side vision that she moved with perfect silence. No footsteps, no rustle of clothing, no sound of breathing, or any of the small noises that typically accompany human movement. "Thank you," she said, and there was something in her tone that sounded almost disappointed, as if she'd been hoping I would look directly at her. When she walked away from the front desk, I glanced towards the lobby mirrors and felt that now familiar chill. The mirrors reflected the towels floating through the air at the appropriate height, but showed no person carrying them. The towels moved with purpose and direction, maintaining the same graceful pace as the woman I'd just served, but the reflective surfaces showed only empty space around the floating linens. As the towels disappeared into the elevator, I heard her voice one more time, though she was no longer visible. "You're learning quickly, Ezra, but there will be harder tests." I forced myself to return to the night audit paperwork, determined not to let fear cloud my judgment. Whatever was happening at the Hassayampa Inn, the rules were clearly designed to handle it. As long as I followed the procedures exactly, I would be safe. The key was to treat each encounter as simply another operational protocol, to be executed with professional competence. At 1:45 a.m, I was conducting my security rounds when the elevator doors opened on the 5th floor without any apparent cause. I hadn't called the elevator, and no guests were visible in the hallway. The empty car waited with its doors open, interior lights casting a rectangle of yellow illumination across the dark corridor like a portal to somewhere else entirely. The elevator's control panel showed that it had been called to the 5th floor, but the call button in the hallway wasn't illuminated, and I could see no one who might have summoned it. According to my guest registry, only 3 rooms on the 5th floor were occupied, and all those guests had checked in hours earlier with no indication they'd be moving around the hotel during the night. But as I approached the elevator, I could hear sounds coming from the 5th floor. Voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize, footsteps moving with purpose through corridors that should have been empty, and what sounded like doors opening and closing in rapid succession. Rule 2 was specific and unambiguous. Remain inside and press L for lobby 5 consecutive times. The handwritten edition emphasized counting the presses allowed to ensure accuracy, and warned against exiting the elevator under any circumstances. It also noted that the 5th floor is not accessible to staff. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the lobby button once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, in rapid succession, counting each press aloud as instructed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As I made the final press, I heard a voice from the 5th floor corridor call out, "Ezra, Ezra, we need help up here. There's been an accident." The voice sounded human, genuinely distressed, exactly like someone who had encountered a real emergency and needed immediate assistance. Every fibre of my customer service training demanded that I respond. that I get off the elevator and provide whatever help was needed. But Rule 2 was absolute, and the handwritten additions had been clear about never exiting on the 5th floor. I remained in the elevator as it began to descend, listening to the voice continue calling for help until the doors closed and cut off the sound. The elevator descended normally, but as we passed the 4th floor, I noticed the floor indicator displaying symbols instead of numbers, geometric shapes that looked almost like ancient writing or hieroglyphs. The symbols were intricate and seemed to shift slightly as I watched them, as if they were alive or responding to observation. One symbol looked like a stylized eye, another resembled a doorway, and a third seemed to show a figure falling or being pulled downward. By the time we reached the lobby, the display showed a normal L in the familiar red LED font, but the image of those symbols remained burned into my mind, particularly the falling figure. Had that been a warning about what happened to people who exited the elevator on the 5th floor? I made a note in my security log. 1:45 a.m. Elevator system test completed successfully. All floors responding normally to call commands. If anyone asked, I had documentation of a routine operational check. The next hour passed with increasing supernatural activity that tested my commitment to following the rules exactly as written. The piano music from the ballroom began at 2:20 a.m, but this time it was accompanied by a full orchestra and what sounded like a crowded social event. I could hear laughter, conversation, the clink of champagne glasses and the rustle of formal clothing as couples moved across the dance floor. The sounds were so realistic and detailed that it was difficult to believe they came from any kind of recording or sound system. I could distinguish individual voices, specific conversations, even the sound of high heels on a wooden dance floor. It was as if an elaborate 1940s party was taking place just beyond the sealed ballroom doors. Following Rule 5, I verified that all exits were locked without investigating the source of the music. Each of the 3 sets of double doors remained securely sealed, but warm air flowed from beneath them, carrying scents that made my mouth water. Expensive perfume, champagne, roasted meat, and something else that reminded me of celebration and joy. Through one keyhole, I glimpsed not just shadows dancing, but distinct figures in period clothing. Men in formal evening wear leading women in gowns that sparkled under crystal chandeliers. The dancers moved with the fluid grace of people who had spent years perfecting complicated steps, their movements synchronized to music that seemed to come from multiple orchestras, playing in perfect harmony. For several minutes I found myself transfixed by the beauty of what I was observing. This wasn't some horrifying supernatural manifestation. It was a glimpse into an elegant past, a time when the Hassayampa Inn had been the crown jewel of Arizona society. Part of me wanted desperately to find a way inside, to join the celebration that looked so much more appealing than my lonely night shift duties. But Rule 5 was clear, and the handwritten addition had warned against attempting to gain entry under any circumstances. I forced myself to return to the front desk, though the music continued to call to me like a siren song. My 2:30 a.m. registry check revealed something that made my heart race and my hands tremble with fear. Among the familiar names written in black and blue ink, 3 entries appeared in bright red. Eleanor Vance, room 237, Margaret Tillman, room 312, and Thomas Brennan, room 426. Thomas Brennan, the previous night manager who had disappeared. According to the guest registry, he was currently checked into the same room that was off limits to staff during overnight hours. According to Rule 8, I had 60 seconds to cross out any red ink names with black pen, and the handwritten addition had emphasized that the time limit was strict and that only black ink was effective for corrections. But seeing Thomas Brennan's name in the registry felt like discovering evidence of a crime. My hands shook as I grabbed a black pen from the desk drawer. The red ink seemed to pulse with its own internal light, growing brighter as I hesitated. I drew thick, decisive lines through all three names. Eleanor Vance, Margaret Tillman, and finally, Thomas Brennan. As I completed each stroke, the red ink didn't just fade. It writhed like something alive, twisting and contracting before disappearing entirely from the page. The process was disturbing to watch, as if I was erasing people from existence rather than simply correcting unauthorized entries. When I finished crossing out Thomas Brennan's name, I heard a sound from the direction of the elevator, a long, mournful wail that seemed to come from somewhere far above the 4th floor. The sound lasted for nearly 30 seconds before fading into silence, leaving me with the unsettling feeling that I had just condemned someone to a terrible fate. I checked my watch. 57 seconds. Just within the time limit, but the experience left me shaking and nauseous. Whatever process was responsible for adding those names to the registry was becoming more aggressive, more desperate, and the fact that Thomas Brennan's name had appeared suggested that the disappeared night managers weren't simply gone. They were trapped somewhere in the hotel, possibly forever. At 2:45 a.m, I needed to check the heating system on the 4th floor as part of the routine maintenance verification that ensured guest comfort throughout the night. But Rule 9 prohibited using the main staircase between 2:45 and 3:15 a.m, requiring me to use only the service stairs during this specific time window. As I made my way to the service stairs, I could already hear activity on the main staircase. Not just the heavy footsteps I'd heard the previous night, but multiple sets of feet moving in different directions. Some were ascending, others descending, all maintaining the same unnaturally regular rhythm that suggested something other than human locomotion. The service stairs felt cramped and oppressive compared to the main staircase's elegant curves and ornate railings. The concrete walls seemed to press in around me, and the industrial lighting cast harsh shadows that made every corner look like it might be hiding something dangerous. As I climbed to the 4th floor, the sounds from the main staircase grew louder and more distinct. I could hear voices now, dozens of them speaking in overlapping conversations that created a constant murmur of activity. Some voices sounded contemporary, others had the formal diction of earlier eras, and a few spoke in languages I couldn't identify. "Room 237 is ready for the new guest," said one voice clearly. "The ballroom arrangements are proceeding on schedule," replied another. "Has anyone checked on the night manager? He should be following the protocols by now." That last comment made my blood run cold. They were talking about me, monitoring my compliance, with the rules just as David Park had suggested. I was being evaluated by whatever forces controlled the Hassayampa Inn after dark, tested to determine whether I was suitable for continued employment or whether I would join Thomas Brennan and the others who had failed to meet expectations. I completed my 4th floor check as quickly as possible, noting that the temperature near room 426 had dropped even further. The air in that section of the corridor was now cold enough to see my breath, and frost was forming on the walls, despite the building's heating system running normally. When I returned to the lobby via the service stairs, I found evidence that something had been at the front desk during my absence. My security log had been updated with entries I hadn't written. 2:50 a.m. Guest services provided to room 237 occupant. Satisfactory compliance noted. 2:52 a.m. Registry maintenance completed successfully. Red ink entries processed according to protocol. 2:55 a.m. Staircase access restrictions observed. Employee demonstrates adequate training. The handwriting was mine, unmistakably, but I had no memory of making these entries. The ink appeared to be from the same pen I'd been using all night, and the style matched my normal documentation approach. It was as if something had been controlling my hand, writing reports about my own behaviour while I was away from the desk. More unsettling was the realization that whatever was monitoring me had access to my thoughts, my memories, my motor functions. The hotel wasn't just testing my compliance with written procedures, it was integrating me into its operational systems, making me part of the machinery that kept the supernatural elements functioning smoothly. At 3 a.m, the front desk phone began its sequence of 6-ring patterns, but this time there were variations that made the calls more disturbing. The first sequence sounded like a normal phone, but the second sequence had an electronic distortion that made each ring sound like a scream. The third sequence seemed to come from multiple phones ringing simultaneously, creating a cacophony that filled the lobby with noise. I followed Rule 7 and didn't answer any of the calls, but watching the caller ID display during these sequences was like staring into a nightmare. The static patterns formed shapes that looked almost like faces, contorted expressions of pain, fear, and desperate pleading. Some faces looked contemporary, others appeared to be from different historical periods, but all shared the same expression of absolute terror. One face looked like Thomas Brennan, based on the employee photo I'd seen in the personnel files. His mouth was open in a silent scream, his eyes wide with horror, and his face seemed to be pressed against glass as if he was trapped behind the phone's display screen. The patterns continued throughout 6 complete sequences before finally stopping. During the final sequence, I heard voices coming from the phone's speaker, despite not answering the calls. "Please, someone help us." We followed the rules, but something went wrong. Don't make the same mistakes we made. The rules aren't enough. You need to understand what you're really dealing with. That last voice sounded like Dolores, but younger, more frightened. Had she once been a night manager herself? Had she survived experiences that other managers hadn't, earning her way to the relative safety of the day shift through some terrible trial by fire? During my 3 a.m. security rounds, I discovered that the basement storage light was off again, despite having replaced the bulb just 2 hours earlier. Rule 6 required immediate replacement and a report to morning management, but the handwritten addition about multiple bulb failures suggested this was part of an escalating pattern. I grabbed several replacement bulbs from the maintenance closet and hurried to the basement, my footsteps echoing in the concrete stairwell. The basement felt different than during my previous visit. Warmer, more humid, and filled with sounds that shouldn't exist in an empty storage area. The storage room was pitch black when I arrived, but I could hear movement in the darkness. Shuffling footsteps, the sound of boxes being moved, and what might have been whispered conversations. When I turned on my flashlight, the beam revealed more scratch marks on the walls, but these were different from the ones I'd seen earlier. These marks formed patterns, almost like writing or diagrams. Some looked like maps showing the hotel's layout, but with additional rooms and corridors that didn't exist in the actual building. Others resembled warnings or instructions, though the symbols were too complex for me to interpret. As I replaced the bulb, I noticed that the dark stains on the floor had expanded and multiplied. They formed trails leading from the storage room toward other areas of the basement, as if something had been dragged or had crawled through the space. The stains had a metallic smell that reminded me unpleasantly of old blood. The new bulb illuminated more details that I wished I hadn't seen. In one corner of the room, someone had scratched a message into the concrete wall. Day 15. The rules aren't protection, they're recruitment. Whatever you do, don't let them complete the process. TB. Thomas Brennan had left a warning, scratched into the basement wall, during his final nights. But what process was he referring to? And how could the rules be recruitment if they were supposed to keep me safe? As I stood there reading his message, the light bulb began to flicker. Even though it was brand new, the handwritten addition to Rule 6 mentioned remaining in the basement until lighting stabilized, so I waited, but the flickering grew worse instead of better. Then I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. Slow, heavy steps that suggested someone much larger than any normal person. The steps were accompanied by a dragging sound, as if whoever was coming down the stairs was pulling something behind them. I remained in the storage room as instructed, but turned off my flashlight and pressed myself against the wall beside the door. The footsteps grew closer, and I could hear laboured breathing that sounded mechanical rather than human. Whatever was in the basement corridor stopped just outside the storage room. I could see its shadow blocking the light from under the door, and I could hear it breathing. Long, rattling inhalations that seemed to go on forever. Then it spoke in a voice that might once have been human. "New night manager. Learning the rules. Good. Keep learning. Keep following. Join us soon." The shadow moved away from the door, and the dragging footsteps continued deeper into the basement. I waited until the sounds faded completely before turning my flashlight back on. The bulb had stopped flickering and was now providing steady illumination, though the temperature in the room had dropped significantly. I made my way back to the lobby as quickly as possible, but as I climbed the stairs, I could hear Thomas Brennan's warning echoing in my mind. The rules aren't protection, they're recruitment. What if Dolores hadn't been trying to keep me safe? What if the rules were actually designed to gradually integrate me into whatever supernatural system controlled the hotel? Each successful compliance might be another step toward becoming like the entities I'd been encountering, trapped in the building, forced to monitor and test future night managers. But I was too deep into the night to change course now. Whether the rules were protection or recruitment, they were the only guidance I had for surviving until sunrise. I would follow them exactly as written, and hope that morning would bring clarity and the opportunity to escape this situation. At 4 a.m, the supernatural activity reached a crescendo that tested every aspect of my resolve and compliance training. Multiple guests approached the front desk simultaneously, all requesting amenities without making eye contact as Rule 4 required. But these guests were different from the earlier encounters, more solid, more convincing in their human mimicry. A family of 4 requested extra blankets for their children. An elderly couple needed additional pillows for medical reasons. A young woman asked for ice to treat an injury she'd sustained in her room. All their requests seemed completely reasonable. Their distress appeared genuine, and my customer service instinct screamed at me to look directly at them while providing assistance. But I maintained peripheral focus on each guest, serving their needs while studying their reflections in the lobby mirrors. The family of 4 cast no reflections at all. The elderly couple appeared in the mirrors as they had decades earlier, young and vibrant. The injured woman's reflection showed her with wounds that weren't visible on her physical form, deep cuts and bruises that suggested she had died violently. As I provided amenities to each guest, they spoke to me in increasingly personal terms. "You're doing very well tonight, Ezra. Much better than Thomas did. The management is impressed with your attention to detail. You understand the importance of following procedures exactly. Soon you'll be ready for advanced training." That last comment filled me with dread. Advanced training suggested that my current experiences were just the beginning, that there were deeper levels of involvement with the hotel's supernatural operations. I was being evaluated not just for basic compliance, but for suitability, for some kind of permanent position in whatever system kept the Hassayampa Inn functioning. The piano music from the ballroom reached new levels of complexity and beauty, now clearly audible throughout the hotel. But mixed with the elegant melodies, I could hear other sounds. Voices calling my name, invitations to join the celebration, promises of companionship and purpose. "Ezra, come dance with us. The music is so beautiful. You don't have to be alone at that desk. There's a whole party waiting for you. Just open the doors. Just break one little rule. No one will blame you." The voices were seductive, offering everything I'd been missing in my isolated corporate career. Community, purpose, belonging. But Thomas Brennan's warning kept me anchored to the procedures. Don't let them complete the process. My 4 a.m. registry check revealed the most disturbing development yet. Instead of red ink names that needed to be crossed out, I found new entries being written in real time as I watched. Names appeared letter by letter in red ink that seemed to flow from an invisible pen. David Park, room 502, a room that didn't exist. Eleanor Vance, room 237, appearing again despite being crossed out earlier. Ezra Caldwell, room... I grabbed my black pen and began crossing out the names as they appeared, but the red ink fought back, darkening and thickening as I tried to eliminate it. The process of crossing out my own name was particularly difficult. The pen felt heavy in my hand, and the ink seemed to resist making contact with the paper. When I finally completed the correction of my own entry, the entire registry page went blank for several seconds before returning to normal. But I noticed that my name now appeared in the regular guest list, written in standard blue ink, Ezra Caldwell, Night Manager Suite. I didn't remember checking myself in, and I'd never been assigned a room in the hotel, but according to the registry, I was now officially a resident of the Hassayampa Inn, not just an employee. By 4:30 a.m, I was beginning to understand the true scope of what was happening. The rules weren't just procedures for handling supernatural encounters. They were a recruitment process, gradually integrating suitable candidates into the hotel's permanent staff. Each successful compliance demonstrated my fitness for a role that went far beyond traditional night management. The hotel operated on 2 levels: the visible day shift where normal guests received normal hospitality services, and the supernatural night shift where different types of guests received services that had nothing to do with conventional hotel operations. The night managers who survived the initial evaluation period became permanent bridges between these 2 realities, but I still had over an hour until sunrise, and the final tests were likely to be the most challenging. Everything I'd experienced so far had been preparation for whatever would happen in the last 60 minutes of my shift. At 4:45 a.m, all the supernatural activity suddenly stopped. The piano music faded to silence, the voices disappeared. The temperature returned to normal throughout the building. Even the grandfather clock stopped its irregular chiming and returned to normal timekeeping behavior. The sudden silence was more unnerving than all the previous activity combined. It felt like the calm before a storm, a gathering of supernatural forces preparing for one final test that would determine my fate. I was updating my security log when I noticed that someone had left a new envelope on the front desk. This envelope was different from the one containing the rules. Older, more yellowed, sealed with wax that bore the Hassayampa Inn's official seal. Inside the envelope, I found a handwritten letter on hotel stationery. Dear Ezra, congratulations on your successful completion of the preliminary evaluation period. Your compliance with established protocols demonstrates exceptional potential for advancement within our organization. You are now invited to participate in the final examination, which will determine your eligibility for permanent appointment to our night management team. This examination requires you to make one simple choice that will define your future relationship with the Hassayampa Inn. At precisely 4:50 a.m, you will detect the scent of desert sage in the lobby area. According to Rule 10, this should trigger immediate evacuation procedures. However, we invite you to consider an alternative response. Instead of evacuating, you may choose to remain at your post and investigate the source of the scent. This action would technically violate Rule 10, but it would demonstrate your commitment to guest service excellence and your willingness to prioritize hotel operations over personal safety concerns. Should you choose to investigate rather than evacuate, you will discover that the sage scent originates from a special reception being held for distinguished guests in our private dining room. You will be invited to join this reception as our newest permanent team member, with all the benefits and responsibilities that such a position entails. Should you choose to follow Rule 10 and evacuate the premises, you will be considered unsuitable for advanced responsibilities. Your employment will be terminated. Your memories of tonight's events will be edited for your comfort and protection, and you will be relocated to a position more suitable to your demonstrated capabilities. The choice is yours, Ezra. We hope you will choose to join our family. Sincerely, the management. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking more with each reading. This was it, the final test that determined whether I became a permanent part of the hotel's supernatural operations, or whether I escaped with my life and sanity intact. The letter made it clear that compliance with Rule 10 would result in memory modification and relocation. I would survive, but I would lose all knowledge of what had happened at the Hassayampa Inn. On the other hand, violating Rule 10 by investigating the sage scent would result in permanent employment in whatever capacity the hotel's supernatural management required. Thomas Brennan's warning echoed in my mind. The rules aren't protection, they're recruitment. He had been right. The entire night had been an elaborate job interview, testing my suitability for a position that had nothing to do with traditional hospitality management. At 4:50 a.m., exactly as the letter had predicted, a faint scent began to drift through the lobby. It started as barely detectable wisps of something herbal and wild, but it strengthened quickly until there was no mistaking what I was smelling. Desert sage, pure and unmistakable. Rule 10 was absolute. If you detect the scent of desert sage in any indoor area, evacuate that space immediately and do not return until after sunrise. The handwritten addition had emphasized that any trace of sage scent triggered evacuation protocols and that previous interpretation errors had proven fatal. But the management letter offered an alternative interpretation. Instead of viewing the sage scent as a danger signal, I could choose to see it as an invitation to join the hotel's permanent staff. The violation of Rule 10 would be reframed as a demonstration of commitment to guest service excellence. I stood at the front desk, paralyzed by the magnitude of the choice. Everything in my corporate training background told me to follow established procedures without deviation. Rules existed for important reasons, and violating them led to consequences that could be severe and permanent. But another part of my mind was curious about what lay beyond the rules. What kind of reception was being held in the private dining room? What would permanent employment with the Hassayampa Inn's supernatural management actually entail? Was it possible that joining their team would be more fulfilling than anything I'd ever experienced in the conventional world? The sage scent continued to strengthen, and I could hear sounds coming from deeper in the hotel. The same elegant party music I'd been hearing from the ballroom, but now accompanied by voices calling my name. Ezra, we're waiting for you. Come join the reception, meet your new colleagues. You've proven yourself worthy, now claim your reward. I thought about my previous life in corporate America, the meaningless meetings, the buzzword-filled presentations, the constant pressure to pretend that moving digital information around constituted meaningful work. I'd been searching for something more authentic, more purposeful. Was it possible that the Hassayampa Inn was offering exactly what I'd been looking for? But Thomas Brennan's message in the basement haunted me. Don't let them complete the process. He had tried to warn future night managers about the true nature of the rules and the consequences of compliance. His message suggested that joining the hotel's permanent staff wasn't the reward it appeared to be. The scent was overwhelming now, filling the lobby with the wild green smell of the high desert. I could feel something calling to me, pulling me towards the source of the fragrance. It would be so easy to simply walk toward the smell, to investigate what was clearly a special event being held in my honor. At 4:52 a.m., I made my choice. I grabbed my jacket and radio, walked directly to the front entrance, and activated the emergency exit procedures that would unlock the doors and allow me to leave the building immediately. As I stepped outside into the cool Arizona morning, I heard a sound from inside the hotel that I will never forget. A collective sigh of disappointment from dozens of voices, followed by what sounded like applause. The applause confused me until I realized what it meant. By choosing to follow Rule 10 exactly as written, I had passed the final test. The management letter had been the ultimate deception, designed to see if I would abandon the procedures that had kept me safe throughout the night. The real test wasn't whether I was willing to violate the rules for advancement. It was whether I was strong enough to follow them, even when offered everything I thought I wanted. As I stood outside the hotel, watching the sunrise paint the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I felt my memories of the night beginning to fade. Not the general events. I could still remember the guests, the rules, the supernatural encounters, but the specific details were becoming hazy, less frightening, more like scenes from an interesting but ultimately harmless dream. Dolores arrived for the morning shift to find my resignation letter on the front desk, along with a detailed report of the night's events written in language that made everything sound like routine operational challenges. According to my report, I had successfully handled several guest service situations, completed all required maintenance checks, and determined that the position wasn't a good fit for my career goals. My letter recommended that future night managers receive additional training in emergency procedures and customer service protocols for handling unusual guest requests. I also suggested installing additional lighting in the basement storage area and scheduling a maintenance inspection of the elevator system. To Dolores, my departure probably looked like a typical case of someone who couldn't handle the isolation and responsibility of night shift work. My report contained no references to supernatural activity, no mentions of the rules beyond standard hotel procedures, and no indication that anything extraordinary had occurred. The memory modification that the management letter had mentioned was subtle but effective. I retained enough knowledge to understand that I had encountered something beyond normal experience, but the specific details that might have driven me to investigate further or share my story with others were softly blurred, made to seem less credible, even to myself. I drove away from Prescott that morning with a profound sense of having escaped something terrible, but also with the nagging feeling that I had missed out on an opportunity that would never come again. The Hassayampa Inn had offered me a chance to be the part of something larger than myself, something with genuine purpose and meaning, and I had chosen the safety of the ordinary world instead. 3 weeks later, I was working as a training coordinator for a renewable energy company in Phoenix, helping teams adapt to new project management software. The work was meaningful in ways that my previous tech industry positions hadn't been. We were actually building infrastructure that would improve people's lives and help address climate change. But I often found myself thinking about that one night in Prescott. I never tried to contact the Hassayampa Inn or investigate what had really happened during my brief employment there. The memory modification had been designed to discourage exactly that kind of follow-up, making the supernatural elements seem like stress-induced hallucinations rather than genuine experiences worth pursuing. But sometimes late at night when I was working alone in my new office, I would catch a faint scent of desert sage and remember the choice I had made. I had chosen survival over transformation, safety over purpose, the known world over the mysteries that lay just beyond the edge of normal experience. I still believe I made the right choice. The Hassayampa Inn continues to operate as a charming historic hotel, providing excellent service to guests who appreciate authentic Southwestern hospitality. The night manager position continues to be filled by a rotating series of employees who last anywhere from a few days to several months before moving on to other opportunities. And somewhere in Prescott, in a building that serves two different types of clientele according to two different sets of operational procedures, the rules continue to be updated by those who survive long enough to add their hard-won wisdom to the manila envelope that waits for each new night manager. The 10th rule still ends with the handwritten addition. Previous interpretation errors have proven fatal. But perhaps there's now an 11th rule, written in careful handwriting, that might be mine. When offered a choice between following procedures and pursuing opportunities, remember that some opportunities are designed to test your commitment to the procedures that keep you safe. The Hassayampa Inn is still hiring night managers. The pay is excellent, the benefits are comprehensive, and the position offers unique opportunities for professional growth in a truly historic setting. Applications are always being accepted, but if you're considering applying, remember that some jobs require more than professional competence and customer service skills. Some positions demand that you choose definitively and permanently between the world you know and a world that operates according to rules you may never fully understand. Choose carefully, and whatever you do, always follow the procedures exactly as written. Your survival may depend on it.